guys, welcome back to Nadir Audio. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Pro-Ject Phono Box DC external phono preamp. So for the past 3 years or so, I've been listening to vinyl with my U-Turn Orbit turntable, which has a Audiophone 2M red cartridge installed on it. And for a big chunk of that time, I was actually listening through the PS Audio Sprout 100, which has a pretty good built-in phono preamp. But I recently moved the Sprout out into the living room to use as a 2-channel home theater setup. And that's actually been working out really well, so I've just decided to leave the Sprout out there. And in my main listening room, I've mostly been listening with this Boyuu Reisong A10 6-watt tube amplifier. And I have been listening to vinyl by using a phono preamp that's built into a Mitsubishi DAR20 receiver that I'm currently just using as a tuner. I'm using it as an analog source selector, and then lastly, as recently I've been using it as the phono preamp. And that's actually been working out pretty well. The phono preamp on that's pretty good. I think it's stronger than the receiver itself. I did a whole video on that receiver, so if you want to check it out, I'll include a link in the description below. But I have, since I've switched to this configuration, been doing some research on external phono preamps and thought I would try out a few sort of at the entry level to kind of get a sense for what I like and then maybe move up from there. So, of course, I've gotten lots of recommendations for the Schiit Manny phono preamp, which was definitely a major contender. There's also the U-Turn Pluto 2, so that's the one made by the same company that made my turntable. I'd considered that. There's a whole lot of sort of entry-level tube-based phono preamps. I think also Cambridge Audio has a fairly inexpensive phono preamp, so there really are a lot of choices. So to narrow it down, I decided that for this first one, I would try to get something for under $100. So the Schiit Manny, which was previously #1 on my list, is slightly more than that. I think it's about $130. And the Pro-Ject Phono Box DC is $99. So with the free shipping that I get with my Prime account on Amazon, yeah, I was able to get it for just under $100, which works out pretty well. Now the Phono Box DC comes in 2 colors. You can get it in the black, and then it also comes with this sort of brushed metal faceplate. So generally speaking, I prefer the sort of brushed metal look. If you've seen any of my vintage videos, it's probably not too surprising to you. I kind of like it as kind of a cool retro feel to me. But I would have been, if black had been the only option, I would have gone with that. So yeah, let's take a little closer look at the Phono Box DC itself. So the Phono Box was packaged pretty well. It comes in sort of a heavy-duty cardboard box, and then there's this sort of paper slider that goes over the outside to keep the whole package together. And then once you get it open, there's actually a couple of other smaller heavy-duty cardboard boxes inside. Now the larger box contains the phono preamp itself, and it actually has some nice egg crate packaging in it, so it's nice if you're going to reuse it, and it keeps it from getting damaged in transit, so that works out pretty well. And then the other box we have here actually has our power supply in it. Now the power supply itself, unlike the Phono Box, has a bit of a cheap feel. It's kind of got that sort of hard plastic made in China feel. Obviously I haven't opened it up, but I assume that the electronics inside aren't that great either. And then it has these adapters. Obviously they sell this in multiple markets, so I've selected the adapter for the US. But I'll probably replace this at some point, but I'm going to use it right now. I don't have a 18-volt center positive power supply that I can use in place of it. So we'll stick with this for now, but I think I probably will replace it. Now the Phono Box itself, in comparison, actually has a really kind of a high quality feel to it. It's really heavy. It's quite a bit heavier than sort of the Schiit products that are a similar form factor. It has a nice heavy duty chassis with a sort of a nice crinkle coat paint to it. And then we have the nice brushed metal faceplate on the front that has a nice high quality look to it and no rough edges. So it's actually seems surprisingly well built for the price point. Now when we take a look at the back, like most phono preamps, it's pretty simple what's going on here. We have our input and then we have our line out, and then if you need a ground, we also have the grounding post over here. So the only other thing that this has that's sort of unusual for these entry-level phono preamps is it does have a selector where you can select either moving magnet or moving coil depending on what cartridge you have installed in your turntable. And that's kind of nice. That's something you don't see too much on these entry-level ones. But we're using a moving magnet for the time being, and probably will be for quite a while. So I'm not going to need the moving coil selector right now. But it's kind of nice that it has it and makes it more versatile down the road. But yeah, in general, it's just a simple device, but it has a nice, aside from the power supply, it has a nice kind of quality feel to it. So let's take a look at it in our stereo setup. Okay, so we have our U-turn orbit running directly into the phono box, and then the phono box is running through an auxiliary input and our Mitsubishi receiver here, and then the receiver is actually running into this Boyuu Reisong tube amp, which is what we're actually using for amplification, and then everything is coming out from the KEF LS50s over here. But I also have it set up so that the out from the turntable is also running directly into the Phono Preamp in the Mitsubishi. So we can switch from the phono box to the Phono Preamp in the Mitsubishi just by moving this knob, and that allows us to do A/B comparison tests. But before I did much of that, I did just listen to the phono box with a few albums. And I was able to notice a big improvement right away before I even started A/Bing. But then I did do some specific A/Bing, which we can talk a little bit about. So the first album that I A/B comparisoned was Lotus's 2014 reissue of their album Nomad. This is a really great album, and it's actually a really good recording. If you haven't seen my video on that, I'll link it in the description below. But yeah, it's when you A/B directly between the Mitsubishi and the phono box, it's a pretty dramatic difference. Now, it's not that the Mitsubishi sounds bad; it's actually pretty decent, but there's just lots of little things that are better, and they all add up to a pretty dramatic difference. So you certainly get better resolution on things. You get more richness and fullness of the sort of vinyl sound. You get a better spaciousness and room sound. And generally, just in comparison, when you go back and forth, the Mitsubishi just ends up sounding a little bit lifeless, a little bit dull, a little bit flat. So I'd say that really the only thing about the phono box that is maybe a slight issue for me is that I feel like with this setup, it does slightly tilt up the treble just a bit. Not to the point where it's fatiguing, but I have a fairly high tolerance for that. So if you're somebody that, if you already have a system that you think sounds bright, that may be something to bear in mind. I do think that the Boyuu tube amp is definitely tilted up a little bit in the treble and the bass, and a lot of people do find LS50s to be bright speakers. I don't find so much that they're bright, but I think that they can be more revealing of the electronics they're connected to, and so may emphasize that if you have kind of a bright setup. But again, it wasn't something where, if I could tune it exactly, I'd bring it down just a touch, but it doesn't really bother me. I get used to it right away, and it just sounds really good. So, I listened to a few other albums too, as well. I listened to the Stan Getz and Charlie Bird Jazz Samba. I've talked about this a little bit in previous videos. I have the original Verve pressing of this that I had pulled from my parents' record collection, but unfortunately it's pretty scratched up. It was that way when I first found it. So I got this reissue, and yeah, it sounds fantastic. And again, that sort of spaciousness really comes across in this, and it really sounds great with my tube amp. Another album that I listened to was Beacons of Ancestorship by Tortoise. If you are into instrumental music, you should definitely check out Tortoise. I'd probably, if you're just getting into them, I'd probably start out with one of their early albums, like their first album, or Millions Now Living Will Never Die, or TNT. But I have all their albums, and I think they're all really great. And this is also a fantastic sounding recording, and it sounded really good here. And I just listened to a few other things. I'll mention one more album that I listened to, which was this Analog Productions reissue of the RCA Victor Living Stereo version of Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra. This was performed by the Chicago Symphony and was conducted by Fritz Reiner. And this is, really an amazing audiophile sounding recording, and, talk about dynamic range. It's really kind of amazing. Now, pretty much all of you are going to be familiar with the first movement of this, which is also in the title sequence to the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. But the whole thing is really a pretty cool piece of music, and this is a really good recording of it. So this is an example of a recording where you really feel like you're kind of getting back in time, and it sounded great with this setup with my Orbit and the Phono Box. And so yeah, it's highly recommended. So yeah, in general, I'm very happy with this first foray into an external phono amp. Now I am going to be looking at others. We'll take a look at the Manny and a few other ones in upcoming videos. But yeah, for now I'm really happy. I think we can retire the Phono Preamp on the Mitsubishi and just move on to bigger and better stuff. So yeah, that's it for this one, guys. I will talk to you all in the next video.